I've had a question on a couple of times over the break, and also coming back for the last couple of weeks. People are, I think we all forget things over the Christmas break, and we think things that we've had in our processes for many years, and then we suddenly think we second guess ourselves and start asking questions about whether what we are doing is right or not right. Now remember, we've talked about this last year, wrote a newsletter about capital gains withholding tax last year, and so you can always hop onto our website and go back and find that from last year's newsletter archives. But it was 2016 when the Tax and Superannuation Laws Amendment came through and it was introduced, and it relates to legislation where a purchaser has an obligation to withhold capital gains tax on behalf of the vendor. Now, under these laws, the purchaser is actually obliged to comply with a foreign resident capital gains withholding payment obligation under a number of conditions. So firstly, if the vendor is a foreign resident, so a vendor's deemed to be a foreign resident if the vendor doesn't provide the purchaser with either a valid clearance certificate by the time of settlement, if they're disposing of an asset that requires a clearance certificate, or they've provided a vendor declaration stating that they are an Australian resident when they're asked to do so by the purchaser, or obviously the purchaser's solicitor or conveyancer, with respect to a transaction involving an asset for which the vendor declaration can be used to actually avoid the withholding tax being imposed. So, and obviously the second part where, in the second situation is where the market value of the property is $750,000 or more, even if the vendor is not a foreign resident. So that's every property you're selling. Now, so many, with the rise in property prices, with the rise in the market and the surge in the market that we've had in the last year, there's not a lot of properties. I mean, obviously there are in different areas, there are properties well under the 750,000, and when we start looking at some strata and other things, they're in all areas. But there's a majority of properties are now well and truly in excess of 750,000. Remember when we got this legislation back in 2000, that price for a non-foreign resident, so for anyone selling property, it was 2 million. Well, that's come down and down, and it's been at 750 now for a few years. So it's really, now this is not a gig for the agent, but you certainly need to know about it. This is the responsibility of the vendor and the purchaser's solicitors or legal representatives to actually make this happen and make it happen correctly. Because obviously the ATO are very interested and need to have these processes in. So unless the vendor supplies the clearance certificate which is gained from the ATO, the purchaser is actually required to withhold 12.5% of the sales price at settlement, and they're required to send that 12.5% through to the Australian Tax Office. So it's, this type of transaction applies to vacant land, to buildings, to residential, commercial property, to both leasehold and to strata title schemes. So really, the majority of agents here in New South Wales, that's what you're dealing with. So this fits for everything. So this means that as agents, you should be prompting your vendor to discuss the issue with their solicitor when they request for the preparation of a contract. So right at the beginning of it, don't leave it till the end, because it may take some time. On the whole, it doesn't take long for these clearance certificates to come through, but if there's an issue, obviously, as with any government department providing a certificate, if there's any sort of hiccup, it's going to take some considerable time to come through, and that may well delay settlement. And obviously in those scenarios, the terms of the contract will apply to any, for normal delays at settlement and who's at fault for that. So, you should actually be prompting your vendors to start the process, particularly if your opinion of price, your estimate of price is 750 or above. So they're going to have to provide that clearance certificate if the property is in that price range. So remember, that's for foreign residents or not at the 750 and above, and it's for all property for any foreign resident. Doesn't matter how much it is your estimate of price is on that one. So guys, remember, it's certainly not your job to give advice around this transaction, because that's giving legal advice, which you're not to do. Leave that for the vendor and the purchaser's legal representative, and making sure that that it's happening in a timely manner. So whilst you're busy out there finding a purchaser and making a transaction and making this work for your vendor, then making sure that all of these background things are happening to make sure settlement is nice and smooth and timely at the end of the deal. So hopefully that's good. And as I said, if you want to know more information about that, there's obviously always the tax office site. There's our newsletter from last year, which you can find on our website, and there's also information on the New South Wales Fair Trading website. So lots of places where you can go and get advice and information about how you will talk to your vendors about that issue.